Exactly. There's the known path, the unknown path. I knew what I was going into if I were to take on in that promotion, and I was like, I don't really know if that's what I want to stay in versus like there's this unknown thing that's very interesting to me, and I want the opportunity to learn. And there are several instances I could cite as examples where I've done that consistently throughout my career, and it's benefited me because I've learned something I didn't know before versus taking the traditional route.
Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick break in the video you're watching to thank you for sharing some of your time with us and to give you a little background on what you're watching. My name's Alessandro Barbarotta. Welcome to BizDevChicago, a video podcast that unlocks unique business insights, mindsets, and personal stories from some of the brightest leaders in Chicago who have been generous with their time and are willing to share some of their experiences and knowledge with us so we can maximize our own business opportunities and unlock our own potential. These interviews are made for you. So if you're an executive, a business leader, an entrepreneur, a professional starting out in your career, or a seasoned veteran looking for some new perspective or business tactics that you may not have found anywhere else, this is for you. So thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you enjoy the content. We look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Welcome to BizDevChicago. Now back to the interview. Brandon, thanks for being on BizDevChicago.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure having you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. You know, when I came across your profile and your company, I thought you'd have a lot of insight and value to share with the audience here. And I think as the second participant in this podcast, I'm going to have a wall of the first 10 people. The picture's probably framed someplace, so you're going to be up there.
That's great.
I want to just start off with maybe just an origin story of who Brandon is, right? I mean, growing up, who were you? Things that maybe helped you become the person you are today. Just some insights and context into you as a person.
Sure. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a very humble neighborhood. East side of Cleveland, and I spent a lot of my time growing up as a kid playing sports and being outdoors. Studied a lot in goalkeeping for soccer, so it's where, really when I look back on it, is sort of where I had this notion of being able to sort of serve and lead from behind, right? The idea of a goalkeeper is obviously like preventing the other team from scoring on you, but also offering the team input from behind because you have that full visual view of the field, right? I went to Miami University down in Oxford, Ohio, and did go in with initial studies around medicine. And after about a year of doing that, and I worked in a lot of emergency rooms at the same time, interning and whatnot, just to learn the business and the practice of it. But after about a year of doing that, I actually also became fascinated with technology, and this is when the internet really started to become really commercialized. And you saw this is the era of the bubble that started to emerge. And so I took a step back and took the opportunity to actually travel abroad and study international business and economics, and at the same time, technology, information systems. And so I actually saw, I became really passionate still about science and healthcare and medicine, but also these new technologies and how they started to emerge. So I went through with my business degree with information systems background, and then came out of that and was recruited by a company, a large media entity here in Chicago called Starcom, which had spun out of Leo Burnett, really strong legacy here in Chicago as a big global agency. And so I went into there, and in that environment, I was fortunate to take on some very large brands like Disney and Kellogg's and Kraft, and learn a lot from some of the best marketers in the space. And it just so happened that during that time period, Starcom Media Best Group, Starcom at the time, had actually launched a division called Starcom IP, which is run by a very well-known individual here and globally, Rashad Tabakawala. And so I jumped into that entity, and it was at that point when I started to realize that transformation was going to impact a lot of the businesses I was working on, like Walt Disney World, who is sending out vacation videos via VHS tapes, right, through a 1-800 number you see on TV, and saying, well, if it's costing you $400 to $500 to do that today, what if we actually did this online? And in doing so, dramatically improve the ROI on those recruitment and those lead generation efforts. So taking that same capability and thinking about how we could digitize the world through a variety of different clients. So did the same thing with Kellogg's, bringing their brands into the online environment to create interactions for their customers, and the same with Kraft. And then the opportunity to actually build the global infrastructure. We had a brand new client come on board. At the time, it was Sun Microsystems, which was really a core enterprise technology company that was the foundation for the internet and all these new e-commerce companies that were popping up.
Yeah.
And so they brought us on board to help them think about global infrastructure. And we actually built, a small team of us built the global infrastructure inside of SMG that then led to a variety of new clients coming in the door, like Oracle and BlackBerry and Samsung and Microsoft. That became a huge growth opportunity inside of SMG and for Publicis overall. And so the whole notion is throughout my career, I spent a lot of time on helping to build the infrastructure and transform companies to really think about how they can embrace the future and the reality of data and technologies to grow their business. And so it became, for me, it was like this idea of how much impact can I make? And when you're inside of an agency, you have a certain level of influence, a circle of influence that you can achieve, and it stops at a certain point. So when the opportunity came up to join Transparent, which was founded by a close friend and mentor and former boss of mine, it was very obvious that I could make that impact in Transparent and what we do here today.
For some people in the audience that may be younger in their career and figuring a few things out, I see some commonality in your story, because I went to, my initial university track was also pre-med.
Yeah.
And then I changed junior year into business, and then I changed into digital cinema. So I've had a lot of passions. But for you, what was it? Was it one thing, or was it a mindset shift, or what was the change from pursuing medical pre-med to then looking at business?
So I'll get to the story. They actually do converge,
okay.
And I'll explain that in a second. But for me, it was this notion of I really value like the idea of like where the future is going. I'm very interested in that, and that was what got me into medicine first. Was this idea is where's healthcare going in the future? But knowing that there was the advancement of all these new technologies that were emerging, I wanted to understand how that was impacting society and these companies that were supporting that. So for me, it was like this. There was also this notion that a lot of physicians I talked to as I was working in emergency rooms, I got exposure to medical students, to the directors of emergency medicine, to some of the top surgeons, and they all said, like, listen, in reality, this is back in the late 90s, this is a business, and there's a lot of red tape here, and it can be very difficult to actually be able to advance and grow unless you're really passionate about it. And I said, well, that's a good question. I don't know if I'm truly passionate about it or not, but let me take a step back, because I can always come back into this.
Right.
Take a step back and explore some other areas. So being able to travel internationally and to jump into this opportunity around business and technology was pretty fascinating, because I saw it moving very quickly, and you had to be sort of agile in that space. And so there was a much bigger learning curve for me that I really sort of embraced, and that's sort of what got me in that position.
Do you think you have a personality that if you have an itch, you want to scratch it in terms of figuring things out and tasting different things and understanding?
Yes. So the big thing for me is every time I pointed out those different opportunities I was given. So after my first year inside of Starcom, right, I was approached, and I had two options that were given to me. It was one, it's like, hey, we think you're great. We want to promote you inside of Starcom to go and run this account. Or there's this new thing called Starcom IP that was developed. We don't know what's going to happen to you, but those guys are focused on the internet. And I took the risk of not getting promoted and not getting an increase in pay to go, because I was passionate about where this digital thing was going.
Sure.
And for me, it was like the idea of investing in my career early in knowledge, because maybe that'll pay off in the future. And it was a risk, but it actually rewarded me, because as I grew in my career, I became one of three people what they called cross athletes that had both this, in those days they called it online offline experience, that allowed me to take on these other businesses and bring that perspective and that knowledge that again helped expedite my growth trajectory in that environment.
No, that's fantastic, man. I think that insight's key, because everyone has choices.
That's right.
A lot of times you have a safe choice that may have some instant gratification, either financially or otherwise, or you have a risk, and you never know what the other option would have been.
That's right.
But you chose the riskier, and I think that's very entrepreneurial mindset focused.
Exactly. There's the known path and the unknown path. I knew what I was going into if I were to take on that promotion, And I was like, I don't really know if that's what I want to state versus like there's this unknown thing that's very interesting to me, and I want the opportunity to learn. And there are several instances I could cite as examples where I've done that consistently throughout my career, and it's benefited me because I've learned something I didn't know before versus taking the traditional route. And here's the reality. I spent 16 years inside of an agency in a holding company. And, part of my job, running massive business across 30 countries, 130, 150 people, was to continue to sell products. In some cases, forced to sell product that you didn't necessarily agree with, right? And so I wouldn't, but there's a very different dynamic that I've uncovered being on this side of the business. And this notion of being, it's like the notion of empathy and being more humble in your salesmanship. And the idea of like, I want to listen and understand, and we actively do this, like what are the key challenges you're facing? Like you individually for the company, and we work with a lot of companies where we get to this really deep discussion about the interaction between the leaders in the company and how that might be preventing the company from progressing. And those level of discussions allow us to actually surface where we can create those connections and those relationships inside the company. So there's alignment among the executives and a clear story about how if they work together and understand the requirements that they need, there's value that can be had on both sides of the organization. And that tension specifically is between like IT and marketing, right? IT has built products. They do amazing work in creating these technologies, but they don't necessarily look through the lens of marketing. Now, marketing wants all these great things to happen, but they don't understand all the things that are required on the technologies to make that happen. So if you bring those two together and you have someone to translate that and help bring that understanding, that is an enormous value. And that's the biggest issue that's going on in the industry right now. Yeah. And you're starting to see more and more of like marketing talking IT, and so that's really what we're trying to solve for, and where we're embedded is to be that conduit between marketing and IT.
Yeah.
Transparent's an independent marketing technology consultancy, and simply put, our job is to help simplify the complexities that organizations are facing around the overwhelming number of technologies that are available to them and the abundance of data. And so we help simplify that for them, and in an effort to create like meaningful end-to-end customer experiences that create value for those customers and thus for that company. What we found is a lot of companies, just as all this data has emerged, they're lost in it. There's inaccuracies in the data. There's duplication, and so our job is to help simplify and create more concise view of that data. Okay. And take advantage of the investments they're making these technologies, which in many cases they invest in and aren't utilizing, and they're wasting a lot of money. So our job is to maximize that, and even think about the operations around that as well. We address a lot of different issues that they face, anything from how to organize their data, systems that they need on board to create more value inside of their company, operationally, how are they setting themselves up to be a very productive organization around these new technologies, and even uncovering some of the opaqueness that exists with these new automated capabilities that are delivering advertising back to customers. So those are things we really focus on. But we're now starting to get a lot into even some smaller startup companies that are trying to build from scratch and making sure they're doing it right. Yeah. And then healthcare is becoming a very big business for us as well. As companies are trying to understand how do they actually improve the human condition and the patient journey and make it more like a Starbucks experience versus like you're sitting there, you're waiting, it's painful. Like that's not what healthcare should be. And we want to make sure that's more meaningful, and the technologies are out there to do that today. How do we help hospital systems do that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, anytime a brand or an organization can remove the friction for the user experience, that pays dividends in the future. So what would you say would be the top, 3 problems or opportunities that your company helps solve for its clients?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's actually getting control and an understanding of the data itself. Many companies, even those that are less than 2 decades or less than 20 years old, that sort of emerged in the internet era, are struggling today because they built up these different data systems over time, and they're not talking to each other, right? So the idea of getting a grasp of the data, homogenizing that data, so they can get a better view of their customers and their interactions in more of a real-time fashion, so they can do a better job of communicating with their customers. That's one piece.
Sure.
The second is actually operationally setting themselves up to do that, because again, they've worked in these silos and they have to unify the company and how they operate and process and standards around that. The third is it's related to that, but it's the culture around it. you have to make sure that you have a culture that really embraces this notion of like we live in a world that is informed by data, and the more you can get a company to rally around that, the more you can deliver on the value back to the customer itself. And that culture must really embrace a customer-centric view, because that's ultimately what you're delivering against. And you have to, that will establish improved trust among the customer, which means that customer will continue to come back to you.
PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study a few years back, and they looked at organizations, and they came up with an organization that has 2 or more disparate systems in their processes runs an average cost to the employee of $200 per employee per month because of these siloed, disparate systems that are being used.
So there are great stats around companies that show those that do not embrace this notion of digitization and unification of systems, they are actually losing money on an annual basis, like anywhere between 5 and 20% on revenue. They're leaving on the table, right? Versus those that are like sort of embracing it, they're sort of maintaining a flat line. But those that do embrace it, which is about 25% of companies, are achieving incremental revenue of 5 to 25% on top, right? So to that notion, like those companies that recognize it and truly embrace it, they're the ones that are continuing to grow, and that's where you're seeing a lot of these legacy companies sort of fall off the Dow, right? And actually, getting overwhelmed or losing their lead relative to these other newer companies that are emerging because they're building this unified tech from the start. I think sometimes we get lost in the ones and the zeros when in reality there's emotion, there's empathy that has to be addressed, and you have to understand those needs and be able to use data to help inform and guide that. So at the end of the day, you have products inside of a brand portfolio. What are they trying to deliver for the customer, and what's the customer needs? So if you understand the problem that you're solving for the customer, how are you using data to understand what you're trying to sell and who are your customers are? There's a great story from a product that we supported a long time ago. So I'll share with you, which is it's BlackBerry, right? So BlackBerry defined the smartphone category. It's not around anymore. But what was really interesting is, and the reason they weren't around is they were very product focused, and they were very insulated in how so they didn't really look out externally for a point of view on that. But the point on this is that they had the opportunity to they had a really good understanding of who their high profile customers were by using data. So meaning the people that bought the product more frequently than normal people would buy a smartphone, so every 6 to 12 months versus every 2 to 3 years, right? And they knew they were loyal, and they knew how much revenue they were generating, the lifetime value of that. So if you have, versus people that were more fence sitters or simply didn't want a BlackBerry for whatever reason, right? And so the idea of understanding the value of those customers and being able to portfolio manage that allowed you to craft the proper messaging around that, to think about where you need to drive business, where you need to either be on defense and protect your turf, where you can actually exploit the loyalty and drive growth and share in the marketplace. So you have to understand those business dynamics and bring that down to like, what do I need to achieve as a business, and how do I want to address this relative to my customer set and what I know about my customers, and then make sure that I'm doing my best to continue to build trust in those relationships, cultivate those relationships so they continue to come back to me as often as possible. So that's why it's important to have the data to understand who you're talking to and what you want to say to them, to establish and cultivate that relationship over time. And unfortunately, a lot of these companies have brought on some technologies in the past, and because they didn't understand them, they weren't properly adopted and integrated the right way, so they were never fully utilized, and so they're like, well, we didn't get any value from it, so we're not going to invest in this anymore. Right. When in reality, because they didn't know that, like they're missing out a lot. They're leaving a lot of money on the table for themselves and frankly for their customers. So we want to make sure that they're properly educated. There's a lot of complexities underneath, fully implementing in these technologies and properly utilizing them. And it's just having the knowledge on how to do that, and the right skill sets and the right process and standards around it to get the most value from that. And we've seen it over and over again. 100% of the engagements we have prove significant value back to the organization. Meaning, like the money that they would pay for the technologies they're going to use, the data sources they might apply, and our services, like that investment will deliver an ROI that is far outweighing that investment. And we work closely with the leads in finance or the CFO within those organizations to create a cost-benefit analysis so they can definitively and tangibly see that value. In some cases, just general education, like what are these technologies and what are they going to do for me and how are they different from one another,
Sure.
right? And there's all these acronyms that confuse people too and what they mean. Yeah. So our job is to show them the difference between these technologies, the advantage they can bring, and not every one of those technologies is relevant for every company. Right? So some companies are like, we need, this type of technology, and we come and look at the business and say, you're not ready for that yet. And I think that's what happens. A lot of companies, they look at the next shiny diamond that's out there, and they go and they buy it, but it's like an open bookshelf because no one knows how to use it, get the most out of it, and they're not ready for it.
Right.
And so our job is to make sure they're ready, and we put them, we give them a roadmap to talk about the sequence of things they should be doing, and when the business hits a certain threshold, in terms of the volume of customers or what they're trying to achieve relative to their vision, then bring on that capability to support that.
It's interesting because I think you have a unique position where you get to engage with some of the best brands and work with leadership and really have these strategic conversations. And I'm curious for the entrepreneurs that are watching this, for the smaller mid-sized business owner, whoever that is, what are some of the insights that you've gleaned from those conversations with some of the best brands in terms of best practices or things that you wish maybe other small businesses knew that they could leverage against creating their own successful business and implementing some of those things that work well for big companies?
Yeah, honestly, they're looking to be educated and informed, and they want examples and perspective from other businesses. We have hosted 2 events here at Transparent. It's a summit that we hold for our clients. It is primarily only brand organization companies, right? So the big companies we work with, some we haven't worked with yet, but are interested in this type of content. And what we found is we actually put them all in a room together, and we share some insights with them, but we also get them to talk with one another. We force them to talk around certain topics. And what happens in that conversation is they share the challenges they face and how they're trying to overcome them. And we sort of facilitate and mediate the discussion and talk about the different tools and applications they could use in terms of like, how do I manage the politics in my organization too? How do I do a better job of connecting with IT or with marketing or with finance to get these things done? And literally the feedback we get coming out of those sessions from our clients, the client leaders are like, this was fantastic because it's therapy for me. I don't get to talk to other people around this. And it's very reflective of a program I put together a long time ago with the Wall Street Journal on behalf of Sun Microsystems. It was called Yellow Light Leadership, and it was an advertorial we put together in the Wall Street Journal. And it was the idea of like leaders have very few people they can actually get external perspective from to create value in their organization. So we've created that environment, and we're bringing the unique perspective of all the clients we work with together, which is a very limited opportunity that these guys often get. And so we want to create that, and that's really even how our business is built, is creating that network of relationships that come through. So there's a real value in that, and I think the brands certainly recognize that, and they're looking for the opportunity to get in those discussions.
Being a Chicago-based company,
yes.
What's it like doing business in Chicago?
I love it here in Chicago, and I'll tell you why. One, I think we're sort of like this quiet little beast here that no one pays a lot of attention to, which I'm okay with. I like that. We're sort of like hidden here in the Midwest, and we're doing our thing. And we don't, and not having the recognition of like, what's going on in Wall Street, New York, and all that buzz out there, or the Silicon Valley and all the buzz out there around those big companies. There is amazing work that is happening in Chicago, and you've got a great community of level-headed thinkers that are really solving some massive problems. So a couple examples of that are, I'll use 3. One is Tempest, which is a company here founded by Eric Lefkowski, right? So who founded one of the founders of Groupon, and they're a lot of research in cancer, right? And really using machine learning and technology and data to provide more cancer care, right? I think that's really great. And then his partner, right? So Brad Keywell brought Uptake in, right? Which is again solving a big problem around big global manufacturing tools that need uptime, and using analytics to understand when is a big backhoe going to go offline, and making sure that it's properly maintained at the right time so it doesn't happen. And then the third one is actually a company that we're familiar with, we're connected with, called Avia, which is actually solving for healthcare and technology in healthcare and improving the human condition and helping hospital systems around the country do a better job of utilizing new technologies to do a better job of taking care of patients. And so there's so many great things here that are impacting society in a much bigger way. that it gets me really excited about being here in this city and being connected to all these individuals. I recognize I'm a servant-based leader, and for me, it is critical to enable my team to do their best. I have been fortunate to work with some really great people, and there's a lot of people I could go name by name and what they're doing today. They're leaders in very large companies doing amazing work, right? They're driving an agency agenda to transform digital. They're leading efforts inside of big QSR companies. I mean, I could go on and on about this. Sure. And so I really, truly believe that you enable your people to drive success, your organization, you educate them, you bring them the assets that they need, you protect them through that. They will be successful, and as a result, you will be successful, and the clients you're working with will be successful. So I truly believe in that, and I've consistently seen that success over and over again.
You know, it's interesting because some of the most successful companies I've met with and spoken with is when leadership operates and acts that way. You know, Gary Vaynerchuck has mentioned a few times that the way he leads his organization is that he realizes that his employees don't work for him. He works for them.
That's exactly right.
He works for them.
Yep.
And he also tells a story of how his father, running his liquor store, always wanted his employees to work as hard as he did. And he's like, Dad, they don't have ownership in the company. If you want them to work as hard as you do, give them a piece of the business.
Right.
I mean, so you're not going to... But I think that servant leadership mentality and the way that's followed through really does set apart great companies to work for from a culture and productivity standpoint compared to companies that don't do that.
That's right. I was very fortunate. I actually happened to be on a panel with Gary many years ago when he was very early on in his career, as was I. It was on for GE, and it was Linda Buffett orchestrated a panel. And it was interesting. It was the first time I was exposed to him, and I really valued and appreciated a lot of the stuff that Gary was saying. And it very much lived up to the servant-based leadership notion. And so, you know, I've adopted at every point in my career, and every employee inside of Transparent has ownership in the company. And and that's a very important thing for us. And contributions towards how we develop our product. And so, yeah, I mean, every aspect of what you just said is critical to our culture and our values. Like, it's a lot of, like, the culture is all about integrity and trust and enabling people to drive growth. Like, that's essentially what we're trying to achieve here, because we know that type of culture is what everyone embraces, and we'll take that to our clients as well.
I had a conversation once with the ex-CEO of United Airlines. His name, I'll put it in the show notes, I can't think of it right now, but he told me that in his mind, success is not a straight line. It's a zigzag.
Yep.
And he goes, no matter where you think you want to be, if there's an opportunity that comes up, no matter how unrelated it is to that place, go for it, because you'll never know by doing it who you meet and how that will change trajectory.
So there's a funny story in there. So this will sound like a little bit self-serving, but it's interesting. So there was a point when I was at the agency, and I was approached for an opportunity with Facebook. And this is before Facebook was public, and they were still a young company. And like, it got to the point where I went through interviews, and they sat down with me, and they were offering me the job, and they sat down with me and said, okay, here's your salary is going to be, and, you know, if we hit, you know, $1 billion in revenue, you know, here's what your equity be, here's the value of that. And I was like, that's never going to happen. So I'm not going to join this company. Right? So, like, that's why it's a funny thing. I look back on it, because it's like, wow, if I, you know, I'd be in a very different position. But at the end of the day, like, you know, where I'm at now, I love it. Right? So I love what I'm doing, but that's one piece you're always like, you look back on it like, if I would have just said yes to that, like, whole different track. But again, I certainly value every experience I've had. I've been very fortunate with the people I've worked with and for, and the clients I've partnered with, and so I feel really good about where we're at as a company and for my lifestyle. So.
It's an interesting story. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
You know, I think happiness is the number one metric that, you know, people should look for as what success is,
right,
and then everything else kind of rolls up into that. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is no greater opportunity to learn than through failure.
Yeah.
For sure. I can't tell you how much I've learned in this experience here alone through failure.
So you have to be able to put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable, you're trying something new, and you're open to the idea of failure, if not seeking out the failure and speed of that failure, so you can iterate, change, adapt, and learn.
Yeah.
If someone said, Brandon, you are 20 failures away from hitting it big, you're going to want to hit those 20 failures as soon as possible.
And I have this, I tell my team this, everyone that starts a company, and I've said this even in my previous jobs, like, I do something every day where I make myself feel uncomfortable. I put myself in a position where I can, and the fail, they're like small little, they can be small or they can be big. Sure. And I tell my team, I was like, put yourself in a situation where you're going to feel uncomfortable about something or you have the opportunity to fail every day.
Yeah. We're speaking the same language.
Yes.
Like kindred spirits.
Kindred spirits, that's right.
Is there anything that I didn't mention that you think you want to talk about or share that I didn't go over?
No,
it's okay if there's not.
No, there's not. I really appreciate the time today, and I think that there's great value in what you're doing here, and again, a lot of it's about perspective, and we love to talk to people just to learn what they're going through, the challenges they're going through, and if there's any opportunity for us to support them, we're more than happy to do that.
Fantastic. And how do organizations that are interested in connecting with you? Where should they go? Where do you want them to? How do they connect with you? What do you prefer?
Yeah, so we have our website, which we're in the process of redoing, but it's just transparent.partners is our website, and then they can go there, or they can just email us at info@transparent.partners.
Fantastic. And I'll put all the notes and the show notes and all the links for you guys, and look forward to meeting again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, take care.